It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we're going to get litigious. Specifically, we're going to talk about some lawsuits, some possible lawsuits, and some people that may want to file in the future. Who knows? But today we're going to talk law. John, how the hell are you? You've been away for a week now. How's it been?
Good. I'm just pumping the old iron here.
Oh,
No, I'm just kidding. I got some weight. I'm just hanging out in Minnesota with my mom, taking care of her. So doing good.
Good. How's the dogs?
The dogs?
The little dogs from the picture?
Oh no, that's my aunt's dogs. They come over a lot, but that's hers. We don't. My mom has no dogs. She can't walk dogs or anything like that. So nope.
Gotcha. Well, let's jump right in here and let's talk about the settlement proposal from last week. Because for those out there listening that aren't aware, another settlement proposal was put forth to Judge Boulware. So what do we know that right now? Is there any additional information, or maybe you could take this moment to correct some misconceptions out there that people may have about it?
Yeah, well, I hope people listening, they listen to our little emergency broadcast we did about the settlement. We went over the little information the UFC gave, $375 million only for the Lee class. So one big misconception I see, and a lot of people are commenting, a lot of fans are bringing this up. They're like, oh, this is terrible, because they still assume that this is the Lee and Johnson classes together. This covers everything and the case is done, right? And that's not true. This is just for the Lee class. So it's, $40 million more than the previous settlement. But if it's just for the Lee class, because Lee was getting 90% before, on monetary terms, it's actually $73.5 million more just for Lee. So I guess, is that earth-shattering? No, but I also think a lot of people have unrealistic expectations of what the plaintiffs should be asking for financially. And also the unrealistic expectation, not understanding what the risks are for the plaintiffs. We've talked about this a lot. The risk for the plaintiffs and their attorneys, now the attorneys shouldn't be considering this or thinking about this, but they do. This is a case that's gone 10 years and they put millions of dollars into their experts and they've gone unpaid for 10 years. And so they're looking at tens of millions, easily over 100 million, I bet you. Well, that's what they're asking for, $100 million in a cut of the earnings, because that's what their unpaid hours say they earned. So just a ridiculous amount of money sitting there. So what I think a lot of fans think, oh, they should stay and fight because there's potential for treble damages. One is a fan's got to be aware there's not a guarantee you win. Even if you think this case is super strong, you remember they have to get all 8 jurors to agree with them. Now, that doesn't mean they lose the trial if 1 or 2 disagree. It's a hung jury, they can go back. But that creates another burden that they go do the trial again and again and again. That's one. 2 is that there's the appeal process. So this could be dragged on for years longer, and who knows what the upper courts will do. And so there's a risk on their part. And so these people that have put in all this time and effort, they're right now they're thinking, they need to get something out of this, or this could be disastrous for us. And that's the other thing people miss is us. Now, I'm not saying they should settle. Maybe they should try to go to trial and win. But it's unrealistic to expect the UFC to offer a lot more than this in a settlement, because the UFC is just going to say, let's roll the dice and go to trial. And often in trial, even if you win a ton of money, you negotiate down afterwards because of all the risks that come after the trial's over. So that's one thing the fans aren't aware of that are complaining on Twitter. I think the other thing they're not aware of is that settling this actually makes it more possible to go forward with Johnson, because now you've removed the risk of that huge amount of hours and time they put in. They've got compensated for that. And so now going forward with a risky trial, which is the Johnson case, because the arbitration agreements, it's a lot less of a burden for them. So the people that say, oh, this is stupid to settle, I don't think they're quite aware of the risks that they have to be calculated. Not to say that, maybe they should go forward, but if you speak to a lot of fighters, I would say at this point, the majority of fighters that I speak to want them to settle because they need the money. And this, for those fighters, is a sizable chunk of money. Because a lot of them, it's probably more than what they earn fighting in the UFC, because they do not have to pay. They have to pay the attorneys, but they don't have to pay for training, and they don't have to pay for management. So that's the big part on the monetary part.
Real
the other
quick,
thing I think,
if I may, I noticed something, and maybe you can confirm or deny this, but when I was looking at a couple of past antitrust cases, not obviously not in the combat sports community because there aren't any, but I looked at some, and when they settle, I mean, I'm looking at settlements of like 250 million, 300 million. So this is quite a large settlement offer, right?
Yeah, this is, people in the antitrust world think this is tremendous. Now, the judge and fans don't, because they realize what's really being asked for. But you got to remember, we've talked about other cases. There's the NFL case that just got overturned. There's the realtor case we brought up as an example that had almost identical winnings as the UFC fighters. One had those damages trebled, and when they finally negotiated, it was down to 500 million. So just a fraction of what they won in trial. And so there is, even in these cases, there's always these dangers and these risks that are weighed, and then even negotiations afterwards. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to happen in this case, because the UFC makes so much money. It's more, they can't suddenly say, oh, we're going to declare bankruptcy and not be able to pay you. They will be able to pay the fighters. So there's other elements, but there is the risk of the upper courts going to the Supreme Court potentially, and overturning the case. There is a risk of that. It's not 100% guaranteed, but even if it's less than 50%, you're looking at, we have to win all 8 jurors. And even if we are favorable to the Ninth Circuit and really view that we have a favorable chance even to the Supreme Court, it's still a chance you could lose at both those, and then you'd be out everything all over again. So, that's the thing. They're constantly weighing the risk to continue and what they have in the hand right now. And in some ways, I guess a good way to look at it, what if you went to Vegas and you played a game in Vegas that you put your hand down, and every time you lost, right, or every time you drew or tied, let's say it's some game where you draw or tie, and it was very common, you had to double your hand. But if you win, eventually you're going to win, and you get twice back what you put in, or you're going to lose and lose everything. And so let's say 10 times in a row, you end up doubling your hand. At some point, you're going to be like, I just want to get out of this game, because no matter, even if there's a 50% chance I could win a lot, there's also a great chance I could be just bankrupt. And so in some ways you could look at that, they're at the point where we would just love to get out of here with a win, instead of it'd be great to win more, but the risk keeps getting built up more and more as it goes on, because we're spending more and more on this case. So,
and then you have Mark Shapiro saying that if this ends up going to trial and they lose, they will appeal.
Well, he's saying that, and part of it, but it's funny. They did say just a little while ago that they have, that they don't plan, they're not going to up the offer. They maxed out what their offer was, something along that line, and then lo and behold, they up the offer, right? So they're not telling the full truth over on their side either, and they're nervous too a little bit, and that's why they want to settle, because they do not want to go to trial either. Neither side really wants to go to trial, because the risk for both is so scary. But of course, Shapiro is right. They will fight to the end, and who knows what's going to happen afterwards. But to get back to it, by splitting the class, the risk has actually been lowered for the plaintiffs, because this case can settle for an amount that's much closer. If it does get settled, the judge might not agree, but they can try to settle for an amount much closer to what the fighters earned, right? Maybe not as much as they're asking for, but close to what the fighters earned. And now they can separate another case that has its problems, but then can go forward and potentially, even if it's a narrower pool of fighters, at worst case scenario, probably end up similar to this, just with a little less money because they have a smaller pool of fighters. But if they had to go forward both together, That's the crazy thing. And some people said, oh, why didn't they keep this case, the two cases together and go for injunctive relief? Well, then you're adding multiple years onto the case, tens of millions of more dollars, and the case is still risky again. So that's the financial part of the risk. The other part is people are upset. I saw that they settled again, thinking the whole case is over and that there's no injunctive relief, forgetting that Lee doesn't have the injunctive relief anymore. That is Johnson. And the positive here in some ways, again, I think the fighters should get more money, but without injunctive relief as the threat, it's hard to force the UFC to settle more, right? But what you do have is you have a Johnson case that still has injunctive relief. So you get some money for the Lee class that they settle, and the Johnson class can carry forward without the fear of this massive amount of expenses behind it anymore, but also with injunctive relief. So it's the attorneys there will probably feel much better continuing that case for a while. And finally, go ahead.
If I may.
Yes.
With that injunctive relief case, damages would be attached, correct?
It still has damages.
Thank you.
The Johnson class still has damages. The Johnson class still has the problem of the arbitration agreements. All the current fighters are under arbitration agreements, so unless they can get those overturned, they get the courts to overturn them. There's probably no injunctive relief because no current fighters are technically part of the class action agreement, because my understanding is every current fighter has an arbitration agreement.
Is that why they're trying to have that case thrown out, because of those arbitration agreements?
Yeah, well, they're just trying to have it thrown out because of, as they did the Lee case as well. They think there's no merit to it. I think with this judge, it's extremely likely. The other positive for Johnson, though, too, is that this judge has kind of tipped his hand that he's very sympathetic to the fighters. And you're like, wow, we're keeping this judge and we're going forward with another case with this judge that seemed to be, he's not the guy to decide. That's going to be the jury. But he seems very sympathetic to the fighters, the fighters' interests. So that's, you wouldn't want to lose Judge Boulware. So that's another positive. Now, I'm going to bring up one other thing is that I noticed someone on YouTube, this was a comment by them, saying that there's really no problem with the arbitration agreements because the Ninth Circuit has already ruled that when there are contracts of adhesion, they can be thrown out. Now, I'm pretty positive the person that made that comment, I believe his name was Boxing for what was his name? Guide to Boxing. I'm going to go on a limb, and I don't know if I'm right, but I think that guy's Fred Garvin. It sounded just like Fred Garvin. and Fred Garvin's the only one smart enough to cite these cases and bring up this information.
Right.
But he's also the only one lazy enough, right? Lazy enough that he wouldn't call someone that does contract law and deals with this in Nevada. Because if he did, he would know that, yes, the Ninth Circuit ruled on two California cases, the one we even talked about a few months ago, that these arbitration agreement class action waivers can be ruled unenforceable if you have a contract that's unconscionable, right? But that only in Nevada was for procedurally unconscionable. They only needed procedurally or substantively. They only need one of those in California. In Nevada, both procedural and substantive unconscionability are generally required to invalidate a contract. Now, again, what I think Fred did is he looked up and he went through all the statutes and saw that there's statute 104.2302, which states that a contract or clause can be unconscionable, right, under certain conditions. But he didn't look up at the precedent set by cases, because in the Nevada Supreme Court, time and time again, with multiple cases such as Valley Health versus Alexander, Jackson versus Rent-A-Center, Birchie versus District Court, and Gorchie as well. That was the final. Wait, Gonski. That's it. Sorry, my memory's going. Gonski. All of them rule that you need both procedural and substantively unconscionable in the contracts, which I'm sure half our listeners are bored out of their mind at this point. But the point of that is that a procedural unconsciousness is one that focuses on the process of forming a contract, such as the bargaining power of the parties. So the presence of unfair contracts. So this, you could say, is like the UFC has monopoly power and uses contracts of adhesion. They should be illegal. And then there's substantive unconscionability. A contract clause may be considered substantially unconscionable. Man, this is just a load of words for me right today. But and what that is that the clause. Sorry about that. It's when it appears that the contract clause is unconscionable. The parties may be afforded a reasonable opportunity to prevent evidence of that it was unconscionable, or the parties must have reasonable opportunity to turn it down or whatever. The UFC under Nevada law, they have everybody sign the pages. You look at the way they designed it, they have followed Nevada law to a T specifically for these contracts to make sure they don't fall under both of those. So that's my rip into whoever that was. I'm guessing it's Fred. If not, apologies, Fred, but I'm guessing it was you. And then T should go look up those other case laws in Nevada. So.
And Fred, we are only guessing that it's you because it's an incredibly intelligent question.
And also just I'm just kidding. Yeah, just wants to go after me with it. And no, yeah. So Fred, we got to give Fred's his tip of the hat. It's what he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't believe Fred is a contract lawyer in Nevada.
All right. So let's move on a little bit here because you and I took note of a new website that is seeking out people, ambulance chasing attorneys, but they're not chasing an ambulance this time. They're seeking people that may have been sexually harassed by members of 1, the UFC roster, and 2, administrative brass inside UFC headquarters. What is this all about? To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!